Good evening and welcome everyone to the season opener of NATS Chats 2020-2021, which are sponsored by Inside View Press. I'm Kari Reagan, the NATS Chat moderator, and it is my great privilege and honor to welcome operatic tenor Professor George Shirley this evening. Thank you, Professor Shirley, for being here.
Thank you for inviting me, Kari, and also to all of the NATS family. Thank you.
And the NATS family would like to wish Alan Henderson a very happy birthday today. He is on, but without his camera. So you can all use the chat box to wish him a happy birthday. So we could spend an hour just reading your esteemed bio, but I've chosen some highlights to share. As a singer, Mr. Shirley won international acclaim for his performances in the world's great opera houses, including the Metropolitan Opera, the Royal Opera, Covent Garden, Deutsche Oper in Berlin, and many, many others, where he sang more than 80 operatic roles. In a singing career that spans 49 years, he has also performed oratorio and concert literature around the world. Of further note, Professor Shirley was the first African-American tenor and second African-American male to sing leading roles with the Metropolitan Opera, where he remained for 11 years. In 2015, Mr. Shirley received the National Medal of Arts bestowed upon him by President Barack Obama. Professor Shirley began teaching voice in 1980 at the University of Maryland, and in 1987 began teaching at the University of Michigan, where he was at one time the director of the Vocal Arts Division. He was 3 times a master teacher for the NATS Intern Program, most recently in 2012, and was the recipient of the NATS Lifetime Achievement Award in 2014. Since Professor Shirley and I are going to focus more on a conversation about teaching and his career, I encourage everyone to listen to a recent interview he did with Larry Brownlee about his early life, years as a young singer, and how he found his way to opera very unexpectedly. And for an in-depth view of Mr. Shirley's life and career, please go to the History Makers website, where extensive interviews were given by Mr. Shirley. So today, Mr. Shirley, well, since this is our NATS chat, we should share that you joined NATS in 1981. So I can imagine you've seen our organization change a great deal, but let's start with talking about, as a teacher, how you are enduring COVID and teaching.
Well, enduring is a very good way of the challenge. It's interesting that life challenges like this open up new vistas, new avenues for finding ways of moving forward. One of the things that I really am proud of in terms of young people is seeing how they are taking this challenge and are beginning to master technology. You mentioned Lawrence Brownlee, who has a blog, and he's keeping himself in front of the public, before the public eye. He is supporting his colleagues.
Yes.
And young people are doing this in an amazing way, because again, we don't know how long this is going to go on. We don't know what the future holds, and quite possibly something like what we're beginning to see with young people and technology will become a major part of keeping the arts alive and them in their career, active in their careers. So I've spent time, I retired officially in 2007 from Michigan after 20. They've asked me to continue to teach a small number of students every year, and I love teaching. It was my first career as a high school music teacher, and I love teaching, and so I'm happy to be of assistance. I feel that my having a career was really focusing on me learning things about the singing profession that I would not have learned had I stayed in teaching on the high school level without experiencing what it's like to be on stage as an opera singer. So what I've been able to learn from great conductors, directors, and colleagues from whom I've stolen a lot of things, just watching them function, and to be able to pass that on to young people is, for me, invigorating. It keeps me thinking every time a student comes through the door, it's a challenge, and it keeps the gray cells functioning in a manner that if I had stayed retired in 2007, if I was still here, I probably wouldn't be as active as I am in ways that I need to be active. So I've spent time counseling some of my students who came through last semester under these negative conditions,
Right.
and some of them have found it very difficult to adjust to being back in school, just finding the energy, the desire to do the hard work that is necessary to move forward. So I've spent time, the whole lesson sometimes, just speaking to students who are so discouraged. And Zoom and the platforms that we're using, like Skype and
Face.
FaceTime and Zoom, when they work, they're great. When they don't work, which is quite often, it's maddening, it's frustrating, but it's something that we're trying to deal with as best we can. And we were saying in the Zoom faculty meeting the other day, that it's interesting because there are moments of real progress that come, I think, from being in this kind of closeted situation with a student just in front of a screen. There are no other distractions. When you're in the studio, there comes a pianist, and it's a different kind of atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know quite why. I mean, I've seen some wonderful progress from some of the students. I'm thinking, gee, I wonder if this could have happened if we were in the old normal.
Right.
But I think there's something about this kind of possibly more intimate face-to-face encounter that maybe sharpens something inside the student, a desire to really try to focus and understand. I don't know, but there's progress being made, and that's exciting. So we will see how it continues to go.
Mm-hmm.
The Zoom technology, even though they've upped the audio part of it, it still can be problematic.
Yes.
Depending on the atmosphere, depending on the signal, the Wi-Fi signal that students may be using, depending on whether they have a microphone and not attached to their computers. There's so many those kinds of technological challenges that
Mm-hmm.
make us scratch our head sometimes as to why I worked yesterday, and then the next week it's sort of, but it's what we have, and we have to keep pushing the boulder up the hill, or else it'll roll over us. So it's a matter of doing what we need to do to make this as meaningful a teaching and learning experience for both the student and the teacher as we possibly can.
I love that. Aren't we lucky that there is the possibility, to do that, that we do have, as frustrating as the technology can be, we are still seeing our students have breakthroughs. And as you and I discussed last week, there are some motor learning theory ideas that support this online learning, that there can be some positives with more self-efficacy from our students, the more heuristic approach as we talked about. So I'm so thrilled to hear that you've adapted so well and are finding that same experience.
I'm trying. We're all trying. I don't know if I would agree that I've adapted so well.
It sounds like you.
If I had hair, I would tear it all out, but I don't have, so that leaves me up. Yeah, I have to find other things to put that energy into saying, okay, Shirley, what did you do wrong in putting these recurring lessons into Zoom, and then somebody can't get in? So
Yes.
it's a learning experience, trying to
Yep.
figure out if I'm at fault or whether it's the technology.
Right.
That's the problem. But
Tell me when you talk about, you've spent quite a bit of time trying to help your students stay motivated and not, give in to this hard situation. What are you finding that is helping, that you're sharing with them?
well, I hope that it's helping. uh, I just try to be as honest as I can about what I've experienced with life, what I've experienced with frustration, disappointment. it's it's incorrect for someone to look at anyone who's been able to have a career and think, gee whiz, you had it, it must have been easy, it must have been. No. Don't have a student understand that it's always a struggle, that sometimes will go well and you think, wow. And then the next time there's something there that is a barrier that wasn't there the last time. So life is always 2 steps forward, 1 back. I mean, we have to accept that as being a part of living. It's never a smooth road. Sometimes I get a sense that young people have been raised to think you can do anything. It's all right. You do fine. You don't have to really worry about it, which is the wrong message to give them. I visit elementary schools sometimes, and I hear students say, but this is hard. This is so hard. I said, yes, it's hard. Don't let anyone tell you that it's easy, because it is hard. We can't set students up to expect that if you do the work, it's going to get you to the level that you want, because that's not necessarily true. You can only go as far as you have been implanted the ability to go. And what we do as teachers is to try to awaken you to your possibilities, try to awaken you to your potential. You can't put your potential in you. We can't give you a singing voice. We can't give you musicality. We can try to awaken you to what's inside of you and then give you the challenges that can help you to develop it. But how many students have over the years studied hard, really made wonderful progress, and they graduate and they get into the profession and it doesn't happen. They've done all the work, but it didn't happen. It doesn't happen the way they were hoping, praying, and expecting it to happen. Mm-hmm. And depending on what's implanted in that student, some people will become embittered by it. Others will say, okay, something else opens up and they find, oh, this seems to be where I belong. Mm-hmm. One of the students that I was talking with discovered over the summer, and she came back, she took a couple of musicology classes with one of my colleagues, and she realized that, oh, this is something I really am interested in. She hadn't thought about that before. And so she's very excited about it, and she still wants to continue to study singing, which is great, fine. But she's changing her major now to musicology. She wasn't thinking about that when she came to school. Right. But we had something inside of it that was there waiting to be discovered. And finally, the match was lit. And so now she's excited about moving forward with a major in musicology. Singing will always be a part of her life. Right. But that was what she was thinking about when she came to school. So being aware and being open to the fact that this is a path I want to travel, but if something else comes along, yeah, I've graduated students, one of whom took his doctorate with me, tenor, wanted to sing. He took his doctorate and he taught on the university level, the Southeast, for a couple of years. Things changed in his life, marriage changed. He remarried a soprano who was having a career but needed further encouragement. So he gave up his teaching career and apprenticed himself to Columbia Artists Management, and was with them for a couple of years and then changed to the Barrett Agency, where he finished his apprenticeship. And he is now one of the most successful managers in New York City. Now, when he was a doctoral student, management was nowhere near his mind. That wasn't what he wanted to sing, first of all. The teaching was a path, maybe to do some, to get an income because he was married, and take income, but some more experience and do some singing on that level. But now he's a successful manager, Robert Mirshak Artists.
Mm-hmm.
So to try to open the students' eyes to the fact that, yes, you are here because you belong here. You're here to learn more about yourself and about how to develop what you've been given. And yes, you must have a goal. You must have something in mind. But at the same time, I would lie to you if I were to say to you, you study hard and you get the A's and so forth, and you're going to have a great career. I don't know that. No one knows that. But the power that gives life, as far as I'm concerned. So to let them know that it's not easy, it is hard. You must do the work that you are required to do while you're here, and that's the reason why I'm here, to help you to do that work, try to find ways of making it your work more efficient. But what happens to you when you leave here, I don't know. All I can try to do is prepare you for the next step.
Oh,
And that's what I'm here for. So please understand that you must do the work that is in front of your nose to do. That is your job. And
I love that. As you know, I studied with my beloved Miss Ellen Fall, who you sang with. We think we figured out the Verdi Requiem in New York at some point, but she used to always say to us, find your own path in this business, find your own way, and it's not going to look like someone else's. And so I love that. That sounds like that's the same approach you take, that you're here to prepare them for what can come next, but you can't predict what comes next.
I can't predict it. I can't put anything in them that is not already there. I can awaken them to what they bring, what they have, what they were given at conception, but I can't put it in them. I can challenge them to try to find it. And here again, you have to find your own way. Nobody's going to hire you to sing, to sound like Leontine Price or Renata Tebaldi. I tell my students, when you are looking at proper repertoire, trying to find repertoire, then do some listening. You've got all these recordings on YouTube. Do some listening, but when you find a recording that you really like, listen to it maybe 2 or 3 times and then no more, because your ear will capture that sound. And you will find yourself imitating it without you even knowing you're imitating it, because it's implanted in your ear. Mm-hmm. So listen, get a sense of style and so forth, and then record yourself. How many times does you say, oh, I like to hear myself? Well, do you expect the audience to like what you don't like? So listen to yourself. It's one of the best ways of finding out whether you are actually doing what you think you're doing. You record every session with yourself, with your teacher, and then sit down and listen to it to make sure that, yeah, that was better than I thought it was, or I thought that was great, but that wasn't very good. You have the technology now. Use it for your benefit. And if you hear something you don't like, then start trying to work to correct that with your teacher. Get your teacher's opinion of what you just did, what you just heard. And while you are studying, one of my pet peeves with students when I'm teaching is if I give them an exercise, or if we're working on a passage from it, and I say, whatever it happens to be, and they'll then try it, and they'll say, and they'll be looking at me like this. I said, no, look, 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 look. Don't look at me. Because when you're looking at me to see if you're getting it right, you're not concentrating on getting it right.
Mm-hmm.
You can't drive down the road. If you're learning how to drive, you can't drive down the road doing 65 miles an hour with your instructor next to you. And while you're driving, you turn and say, am I doing okay? Is that You can't do that. You have to concentrate 100% on what you're doing while you're doing it so that you can, get a sense of what that felt like. And nothing less than 100% concentration on what you are doing. So don't look at me. We can talk about it afterwards, but learn to concentrate on what you're doing when you're doing it. Start concentrating before you start doing it, and keep concentrating until you have finished doing it. And then we can talk about it. So learning how to gain ownership of what you've been given requires that kind of fierce concentration, not worrying about what your colleagues are thinking about the sounds you're making, or when you become a professional, not worrying about the critics out in the audience, are they going to like my performance? You can't do that. You got to go out and concentrate 100% on doing it. And the chips will fall where you may. Some people will love it, some people will hate it. There's nothing you can do about that. It's hard, it's not easy. It's always a challenge. But that is life. And the people who are successful are those who get rid of those things that they don't need to worry about and focus on what they do need to concentrate on. And to get that across to students is not easy.
Mm.
Some people, okay, get it, and others won't, maybe because they can't. But that's the challenge that a teacher faces.
Did
Challenge
you,
ourselves.
as a young singer, did you have a very clear internal drive? Nobody had to talk to you about staying motivated. Did you have a pretty good due north?
Well, I started singing with my parents at age 4 when I was in church. My mother sang, my dad played the piano, and we performed as a trio in Indianapolis, and we would sing at churches. We sang at our church. I gave my first recital when I was 5. There's a, I have a, there's a photograph of me on a poster standing in the backyard holding a twig from a bush. 5-year-old infant. I won my first singing competition when I was 5. I won second prize in a competition in Indianapolis that was run by a big department store, Block's Children's Hour. My parents entered me in that competition, and first prize was won by a little girl who sang and danced to "One Two Buckle My Shoe," and I won second prize with an old Bing Crosby tune. There's a gold mine in the sky, far away, etc. My dad played the piano, and the prize was a recording. I made my first recording when I was 5. And I can recall, I have very strong memories of my childhood. I can recall standing in the recording studio and watching the wax peel off of the disc. That was a few years ago, right? When wax discs, and this
Yes.
wax was peeling off as I was singing into the microphone, peeling off onto the floor. My parents had that recording until about 1970 when they moved and they lost it.
Oh,
But I sang. Motivation. I was asked to sing. I sang. And when we moved to Detroit with its excellent public school music education system, I was studying music from the first grade on. I didn't go to school in Indianapolis. My parents didn't start me until I came to Detroit. And children in the Detroit system, yes, kindergarten, they sang a few songs, but from the first grade on, we had a music teacher to whose class we went once a week. And we learned, by the time we were in 6th grade, we were musically literate. We could read music, those students who had the ability to do it. Junior high school, wonderful choir. High school was phenomenal. I didn't go to the big magnet school in Detroit, Cass Tech, which produced a lot of professional musicians. But I went to Northern High, which was basically a black school. But in that school, we had a music teacher who exposed us to repertoire, choral repertoire that was no less demanding than at Cass. My first experience singing the solos in Messiah, the tenor solos, was in the 11th grade.
Oh
We
my
did Messiah every Christmas, and I started singing the solos in the 11th grade. My first experience singing anything from the Verdi Requiem was on one of our spring concerts when we did the Kyrie, and I sang the tenor solos in the Kyrie. So by the time I was ready to graduate from high school, I knew that I wanted to be a music teacher. I was so inspired with that teacher, by that teacher, and other teachers at my church that had taught me songs, art songs, a little bit of Schubert. And so my parents started me studying voice when I was 13 with a private teacher in Detroit who gave me some art songs, who gave me some art songs by Howard Swanson, an African-American composer. So I had these influences, and I was being asked to sing this and that. In college, there was no opera program. It was a music ed school, Wayne University in Detroit, now a state university. And in my senior year, I was asked by the Glee Club director to take a look at Stravinsky's Oedipus Rex. He wanted to do that with the male Glee Club. He said, take a look at the role of Oedipus. I said, okay. We did about 3 performances of it, fully staged, very slow movement, statue-like, with the student orchestra. I still have a recording of that. And I loved the experience, but it did not say, Shirley, this is going to be what you're going to do with your life. I was focused on getting my teaching degree, and indeed I started teaching before I graduated. The last semester that I did the Oedipus, I started teaching as an emergency substitute at one of the local high schools. I had my job, I graduated, I had everything.
Yeah.
And Uncle Sam said, Korea had ended before I graduated, but the draft was still in force. So I found myself going into the Army, not as a singer, but as a bandsman. I played euphonium in the Wayne University marching band. So that was my start. But then eventually I went into the Army chorus. And it was there that somebody said, you should think about having an operatic career. I'd never seen an opera other than Oedipus. I mean, I didn't see that. I was in it. So, motivation, yeah, I sang because I loved to sing. There was not, I'm going to be a professional singer. There wasn't that. No, I was going to be a music teacher in the public schools. That was my motivation. But there were other plans by intelligence greater than mine. So that's how I found myself moving out of education into a performance career. So
And then
there, the motivation really became really crucial because I didn't have any operatic repertoire when I was this teacher I was working with in Washington.
was that Tharny Georgie? Was
Temi Georgie was his name. Temi Georgie, part Greek, part Turk. I'd had a career as an operatic tenor in Europe, in Germany, last century, and then early in the United States. I think at Cincinnati and maybe Chicago. I can't remember. But he was a senior citizen teaching in his home in Washington, and a lot of the members of the Army chorus were studying with him. One of my friends talked me into finally going to sing for him. I didn't want to do that. I wasn't interested. I didn't want to get back to my teaching career. But this old guy heard me and he said, you study with me 1 year, I guarantee you'll have a career. Now, I would never say that to someone.
He was right in your case.
He was right in my case, and I don't know whether he had a direct line to God, but I'm grateful that he was, because here again, I decided I would extend my period of service for an extra year to be able to study with him because I was married and we had an infant daughter. And I decided to do it because, and I've said this over and over again, I didn't want to go back into teaching, back to Detroit, and then 10 years down the road, kick myself for not finding out whether this old guy knew
New.
something.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, okay, I'll take a chance. I had no operatic career other than Oedipus. How often is Oedipus done? Huh?
Right.
And I started becoming motivated like I'd never been motivated before in
Mm-hmm.
terms of singing, because I had a lot to learn. I'd studied French in junior high school and high school. And that was it. We never spoke it. I had a notebook full of conjugated verbs, but we never really spoke the language. So I had a lot of work to do to
Mm-hmm.
get myself to a level of acceptability. At the end of my last year in the Army in 1959, I had I'd gotten a call actually from a woman in New York City who ran a small opera company in Woodstock, New York, the Tour Now Opera. Maybe some members might remember the Tour Now. They also had a season in Florida, in Sarasota. And this woman called me out of the clear blue, and she said, I run a small company in Woodstock, and we just lost one of our tenors, and our bass told me to call you. Well, the bass had just gotten out of the Army Corps a couple of months before I was supposed to get out. And he didn't know that I'd extended my period of service for an extra year. The bass was a fellow named R. Berberian from Southfield, Michigan. I didn't know him when here in Michigan, but met him in the Army Corps. He took a degree in law from the University of Michigan Law School and sang in the Glee Club. He was not a music major, but he wound up singing for about 22 years as a bass, leading bass at the Metropolitan Opera. Go. Well, Ara and I, we became good friends. So when he got out and he saw that one of the tenors of this small company had canceled, he told Sally Tournow to call me because he knew I was getting out. And this was actually the year before I had planned to get up and I just extended for a year. So I had to tell her, gee, I'm sorry, I just signed up for an extra year in the Army, so I can't do this. She said, well, come up. But I said, I'll be getting out a year from now. I'll be looking for work. So she said, well, come up in January and audition for us and we'll see where it goes. So I went up in January of '59, auditioned, and they gave me a contract. Wow. So I spent the rest of the year trying to learn some more arias.
Mm-hmm.
And just before I got out of the Army, I decided that I would enter the Met auditions because I wanted to get some feedback from people who knew what I was getting into.
Yes.
I got out, I auditioned, and I didn't win. So I went to the reception following, and I was just standing there by myself. And Howard Hook, who ran the auditions, and John Gutman, who was one of the Rudolph Bing's assistant managers, they both came over to me and they said, we want you to know that we like what we heard you do, but we don't think you're ready to go to New York for the semifinals yet. But keep doing what you're doing. That is all I needed to hear. That's exactly what I needed to hear. And I left there feeling as though I had won.
Yes. Oh, I love that.
So that's how I got into this business. The season in Woodstock, I sang 5 roles, all were in English, thank God. It was a company that had only 7 singers, no chorus. So we sang our roles and we sang the chorus when necessary. I made my debut as Eisenstein in Die Fledermaus. I sang Rodolfo in La Boheme. I sang Belmonte in The Abduction from the Seraglio. I sang Haroun in Bizet's first opera, Jamile. And I sang Torquemada in Ravel's L'Heure Espagnole, all in English. And I walked out on stage that opening night of Fledermaus, and I knew that I was home. I knew that this kid from Detroit by way of Indianapolis started singing in church, sang maybe at a couple of operatic arias before meeting Temi Georgi. Here I am on stage, 2 pianos, small theater seated about 200 people. Perfect way to begin a career. There was one Met singer in that cast and in that company, Joan Wall, mezzo-soprano, who became a very fine teacher as well.
Yes.
Backing up just a wee bit, the Army Chorus did not travel that much. We did all the official stuff in Washington, D.C., the White House and what have you. The Soldiers Chorus at Fort Meade did most of the traveling, but the captain, Samuel Laboda, put on a couple of concerts, one in California back in 1957 at an ROTC convention, and then he booked a concert with the Denver Symphony Orchestra on the way back from that trip at Red Rocks Amphitheater. So we were in that area for about 3 days. It was the summer. And one day, 4 of us hired a car. Our Barbarian was one of the guys. George Wilkins, who became well known as the founder of the Doodletown Pipers that sang on the Perry Como show for years. And George did a lot of arranging after that in California, and a couple of other guys. So we took off and we drove to the University of Colorado to see the campus. We wound up in Central City that afternoon about 4 o'clock. Central City, a tourist attraction, an old gold mining town, and it has an opera company. Summer opera program. So we're walking down the main street, and Ara sees a fellow coming toward us that Ara was in law school with at Michigan. This fellow turned out to be the chief tour guide that summer and also the head usher for the opera. Well, we wound up with 4 free tickets to see Rigoletto that night. The Rigoletto was Frank Guerrera, one of the Metropolitan Opera stalwarts. The soprano was Joan Carroll, American who was having a fine career in Europe. The tenor was a fellow named John Crane, who sang with New York City Opera. I'm sitting there. This is the first opera that I've ever seen in my life. And John Crane is ripping the walls out. I'm sitting there thinking, it's a good thing I never wanted to be an opera singer because I can never do that all night long. Little did I realize that 4 years later, I would make my Metropolitan Opera debut with Frank Guerrera in Così fan tutte, and 2 years after that, sing the Alva in the American premiere of Alban Berg's Lulu at Santa Fe with Joan Carroll. So I tell my students, you're here to do the work, to develop what you have, to learn about what you have, to learn to respect it and to help to grow it. But I cannot tell you what's going to happen when you leave here. That is already, in my view, looking at my own life, it's already written. You'll find out. But the beauty of it is that everything you will have learned will prepare you for what it is that you are born to do.
I love that. And your Met debut, I know you already were under contract, but if I remember right, you went on at the last minute. That the production you just mentioned, correct? You got the call that morning or the night before, and suddenly your Met debut was happening.
Yeah, I was covering Charlie Anthony in Così, and Charlie was running back and forth singing La Traviata in Washington, D.C. and coming back. So I had a chance to do a couple of the staging rehearsals, just a couple, with Alfred Lunt, who the movie actor who was staging. And I didn't do any orchestra rehearsal or anything. So the opening night was delayed because of an orchestra dispute with the Met. When it finally opened, they opened with A Girl of the Golden West with Leontine Price and Richard Tucker. Così fan tutte was the second night. So the day of the opening of Fanciulla, I'm working with one of the coaches, Jan Baer, in one of the rooms at the old Met. And the door opens, and in walks Rudolph Bing with 2 of his assistants. And in his clipped Austrian English, he says, George, do you think you could do the performance tomorrow night? Mr. Anthony is canceled. I said, yeah. So that was it. And the coach and I began, because I still did not have the final ensemble memorized.
Oh my goodness.
So we started pounding. I had written down all of the staging in my score. I had observed the staging. And as I said, I had a couple of times to stage a couple of scenes. I had studied the summer before with Boris Goldovsky, who was, without a doubt, the greatest teacher of opera singers ever. Boris taught us all to be independent of the conductor on stage, to know the score, to have worked out our moves on stage so that it could be almost automatic. It would be up to us as actors to make it not look automatic, but to know at this point, I'm going here, I'm going there. So I took my score and a recording of the opera by Richard Tucker and Eleanor Stieber that Francis Robinson, the press secretary at the Met, loaned me that afternoon. I took that recording home, put it on my hi-fi set, and I spent the rest of the day walking through my staging with the recording playing, walking through it. The next day, I think I probably had to go down in the morning something for a costume fitting, but then I spent the rest of the day walking through my staging. I got to the theater that night for my debut, put on the costume, the makeup, went out on stage and walked through the staging. I didn't make any mistakes. I have very little memory of my debut. My debut. And that got me off on a certain level at the Met because management said, okay, we've got somebody that can step in the last minute.
They loved that.
Most of the operas that I sang at the Met, with the exception of La Boheme, I think that was the only one. And maybe Carmen, yeah, because I sang Carmen and Spoleto. All the rest of it was for the first time in my life. Not necessarily the way to do it when especially on stage with people who've been singing these roles for years. But that was the way it was. That's the way it was written. That was the way it was to be.
I want to.
My training as a musician in school, public schools,
Mm-hmm.
a solid musical foundation and ability to memorize and retain. And my work with Goldovsky freed me from watching the conductor so that I could really make something happen on stage.
Mm-hmm.
My voice was not the great instrument that, say, Corelli's and Tucker's and Gedda's were, but I had a good combination of talents. A pretty good actor, strong musician, and a voice that was capable of doing what it was supposed to do on that stage. So that combination was what gave me the career that I was able to have.
I love that. I want to stick in this time period around the 60s with the Met. And as you and I spoke of last week, in the current cultural and political climate, I really feel like I'd be remiss to not chat with you a bit about diversity in the arts. And I'm very curious, in the 60s when you debuted at the Met as a person of color, singing Rudolfo, I suspect your Mimi was white. And in the 60s in New York, and then I know you went on tour as well. So I think we need to speak to that just a little bit. I would love for you to share your experience and where we've come in 40 years, 60 years since then. We haven't come far enough, we know that, but what is your perspective?
Well, if I'd come along 10 years earlier, I wouldn't have found myself invited to sing on the Metropolitan Opera stage, as simple as that. Robert McFerrin was the first Black male to sing on the stage, and he came after Marian Anderson became the first Black singer. Actually, McFerrin was scheduled to be the first, but I think that Saul Hirak, who was Marian Anderson's manager, probably weighed in and said, this honor should go to Anderson, who has been such a force. And no one could argue with that. I'm sure that McFerrin would agree with that. McFerrin was a baritone. Baritones don't usually do the romantic leads. Tenors do the romantic leads. And for a lot of people then and still today, to see a black male wooing a white female is something that can cause for some discomfort, to say the least. So when I came along, here again, this little company in Woodstock was an artist's colony. And they had already had, I think about a season before I came, a black tenor doing some leading roles. So I wasn't the first. I don't know what happened to this young man's career, but it didn't blossom for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. So my singing these romantic leads opposite the soprano wasn't a big deal for the audience there. They supported the company in doing what they did. I could tell that that wasn't always going to be the case. When I came to the Met, one of my colleagues told me afterwards that there was one soprano. And I found that usually the problem has not been with my colleagues. It's been with members of the boards of directors and what have you.
Interesting.
Yeah, because they're the ones that put the money up for.
Right.
One of my colleague told me one of the sopranos at the Met, who was from the Deep South, had voiced discomfort with my being a member of the company. I never sang with her at the Met, but I did sing with her eventually in a small in one of the regional companies. We did Carmen together, and I had the pleasure of stabbing her to death. But we got along very well. There wasn't a whole lot of camaraderie, but we did our work, and I think I hope and pray that at the end of it, she had some respect for the fact that I was a colleague who was capable of doing the work. Mm-hmm. Right. There were issues. I give Rudolph Bing tremendous credit because he is the man who broke the barriers. He's the one who had the courage, the guts to stand up to whatever opposition there was amongst those supporters of the company. Mm-hmm. And when I made my first tour with the company in 1962, the company always went to the South. We went to Atlanta, Memphis, and Dallas. So friends of mine said, Atlanta's a forward-looking community, so you won't have any problems there, but watch out for Memphis. Oh boy, that's going to be tough. Well, so I arranged to stay with one of my wife's relatives in Memphis. In Atlanta, the black members of the company, there were 3 members of the chorus who were black. And Leontine was to be on this tour also. I found out years later that Rudolph Bing had insisted that she stay at the Biltmore, where the company normally stayed, but the rest of us had to stay at the Peachtree Manor, which is up at the top of the hill. Okay, so anyway, we arrive in Atlanta, and no one, people are there from the local company Met group, and no one greeted me. I said, okay, that's fine. It's quite different when I got off in Memphis. People came to Mr. Shirley, welcome, and I thought, whoa. But the thing that had happened, I go back to Bing. Before the company took off on its tour in '62, he received a communique from the people in Birmingham, who were huge supporters. They threw a big party and so forth for the Met whenever they came. And they said, we just want you to know that the black members of the company won't be welcome at the party. And Bing, much to his credit, said, very well, we won't come to Birmingham.
Love that.
And it was the last time the Metropolitan Opera went
to
Alabama. And it's that kind of strength can move barriers. So in Memphis, as I said, there were maybe a couple of restaurants that some of the black members found they couldn't eat at, but hotels were open, so it was wow. In Dallas, it was very interesting. there was a place called a cabana where a lot of the members stayed. It was, you had a pool and year round, I mean, people who lived there year round. And so Bing called me to his office. He said, George, he said, I would ask you of a favor. He said, would you mind, I wasn't staying at the cabana, I was staying someplace else. Would you mind not swimming in the pool? Because we had some concerns expressed by, I said, fine with me because I can't swim. You need to talk to some of the other people. But yeah, there were problems. My manager, my first manager, told me that he had approached the then manager of the Houston Opera. They were getting ready to do, I think, a magic flute there, and he put my name up for Tamina. And he was told by the manager of the company, well, I'll get back to you. And when the manager returned my manager's call, he said, no, that won't work because the board won't accept it. So that was an eye-opener for me, that the managers of companies were at the mercy of the board of directors who supplied them the funds to function. There was one company that had the support of the board, and that was Santa Fe. I sang with Santa Fe Opera a lot between 1961 and 74. But Santa Fe started in, I think, 1956, 57. And in their very first season, Rary Grist sang. Mm. John Crosby had Black performers. And he had someone at the head of his board named Mrs. Tobin. I can't remember her name, but her husband was the head of an airline that came out of Dallas. But Mrs. Tobin was a strong-willed woman. And somebody told me that she had said to someone who had complained about that she would throw him off the plane. She would not brook any of that kind of stuff. If an artist was capable of being hired, they would be hired. And John was 100% with her in that regard. So that kind of courage was not always displayed. But I joined the board of Santa Fe Opera years ago. Now I'm an emeritus member. But I support that company in everything that they do because they were out front with their support of artistry, no matter what wrapping it came in. So yes, there still can be some problems. People, the era we're going through right now is a throwback to an era that I and so many of us had hoped would never rear its ugly head again. Mm-hmm. But we see it. I've said it often. It's like the waves of the ocean. We have a crest of hope and then a trough in which we drop. And it goes that way. And we're now in a trough that we can only pray will become a crest again, and that the shelf life for the crest will be longer than it ever has been before. That we realize that there are no different races of human beings. Anthropologists have done us a huge disservice in saying there's a black race, a brown race, a yellow race, and no, there's one race, and it's the human race with ethnic subdivisions, but one race. And if we can wrap our consciousness around that real fact, then maybe we can begin to move along. Yeah, they'll be saying, well, the Italians, the Germans, but that's not the same as saying we're a different race. Right. You know, unless I would imagine a different race of being somebody standing in front of you with 3 heads, one in the middle of their back, and maybe 4 legs, and you know, the brain in the middle, behind their belly. But that might be, maybe they are up there somewhere. That's a different race. But this race, the human race, we are all made up of the same stuff, different color, different endowments that prepare those of us to do this and those of us to do that. But we're all human.
I know you're a man of faith and you're such a positive beacon in the world. Are you ever tired of being a vehicle of change in a world that the change should be self-evident at this stage in your life?
Like I said, life is not easy. It never is easy. And if I am called upon to speak what I believe is true, that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm supposed to do. I can't get uptight because some people say, well, I'm tired of educating people. Well, look, if people want to know, then they should be told. And if it comes from me or people like me to do it, then what's the hassle? Do it with compassion, do it with love, do it because there's another human being who is asking, who wants to know. Who am I to stand and say, I'm tired of it? No, not that. No way. That's part of the problem. That's part of the problem. So no, I mean, I would love to see it different. I would love to see in my lifetime, and I know I won't, that the Achilles heel of humanity, the us and the them, what I've called in the past species, feces, I'd like to see that disappear so that it doesn't matter whether I'm black, brown, Chinese, Italian, German, French, it doesn't matter. We're all human. What should matter is what is inside of this human being that I'm standing in front of, that I'm singing to, that I'm speaking to. What is it inside of them that draws me, or that makes me back up? Is there some way that I can? I'll give you a little example. In the Army Corps, I was the first black member of the Army Chorus. Of course, was founded in 1956. I found myself surrounded by whites my age, most of whom had had college education, like me. And it was the first time for, I'd say, about 99% of those guys that they had had an opportunity to interact with someone who had experienced the same level of education that they had, who could speak with them at the same level of expertise, understanding about music. I mean, I couldn't talk to somebody who'd been in medical school because that wasn't implanted in me to do. But it was an education for them that I was there. I didn't ask. I asked to be there because I wanted to get out of the band, but not to educate them. But that was why I was placed there. And it was an education for me because when we would start talking to each other, we found out that many of the experiences that we had were quite similar. Wow. Even though we were of different ethnicities. There was one young man who came into the chorus a few months before I got out. He was from the South, from Mississippi. And he had a bit of an attitude. And he would, he was trying to be, he would call me Ace, which is a pejorative for Ace of Spades. But he sort of said, yeah, Ace. Now, I could have punched him out. I could have cursed him out. But I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I won't lower myself to that level. Although a few years ago, and I got out of the Army course in 1959. About 5 years ago, I was asked to come to Sarasota to give a master class. And I got an email from this fellow. I hadn't been in touch with him since 1959. He said, I see you're coming to Sarasota. He said, I'd like to spend some time with you. Can we meet? I said, yeah. And we did, and we talked. And he said, when we were supposed to go, the chorus was supposed to go, I think, to Dallas or somewhere, on one of the few trips we took. And he said, and you couldn't stay in the same hotel. He said, that's the first time I experienced what it must be like for you in this country.
Wow.
Wow. Now that he felt in that moment that he owed me that explanation, it proved to me that my lack of angry response to him
Was,
was more powerful.
yes.
And it's that kind of response that I've always trusted to happen. Sometimes it hasn't, but it's that kind of response that I would love to see happen out of all of this turmoil that we're going through right now. Because history shows that this isn't the first time. Throughout history, in this country and beyond, back to the beginning, this us and them thing is there and has been. I mean, I was just reading some history of Africa and the African slave trade, the North Atlantic, the Middle Passage and all of that. There was an African queen named Queen Nzinga of the present land. It wasn't called then, but Matumbo, I think, but now it's Angola. She was a queen, and she was quite a powerful woman who was able to withstand the Portuguese, and she really built that nation. She grew. But the interesting thing was, and it says that she was very strong against slavery, anti-slavery, but she also enslaved people, many of whom sold into slavery to the British, who brought them to the United States. So this whole thing of brotherhood, sisterhood, and so forth is quite often, more often than not, overpowered by that part of us that is bestial, because to enslave human beings is bestial. So many of us are here in this country, like me, because our ancestors were sold into slavery by people who look like us. And you think, but that's many of the people, the Europeans who came to this country to find a better life for themselves, who were on the bottom of the spectrum in Europe, in their countries, France, Germany, Italy, whatever. They've been treated poorly. The indentured servants who came to this country had it maybe only a little better than the blacks who were enslaved. The indentured servants were basically enslaved by people who looked like them. So this Achilles heel of humanity, I don't know if it'll ever be eliminated. This desire for power over people, no matter who they are, what they look like, whatever it is. I would pray that it would come to an end, but it doesn't appear to be on its way to coming to an end.
No, it doesn't. If we could, oh, I'm so sorry, finish. I'm so sorry.
I'll just say, so we have to, when these issues arise, we need to do whatever we can to bring them to a solution, a resolution, with as little bloodshed as possible, with as little enmity as possible. We are human animals. And if anybody has any doubt about that, I've often said, just I look at the squirrels and the birds out in the backyard fighting over nuts and seeds. And there we are. There we are. But we're supposed to have a higher conscience. And it doesn't seem to kick in.
One would hope.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to share just a bit more time and take a big right-hand turn towards voice science for just a few minutes. I loved my conversation with you about that. And because I asked you, you've seen a lot of teachers and a lot of technical conversations across the lifespan. And where does voice science enter into your teaching? And I was so tickled to hear that you studied with Cornelius Reed for 5 to 6 years. So I would love to hear just a little bit about that, your experience with that, and how that's informed your teaching.
Well, Cornelius was the first teacher who put me in touch with what's actually going on in the instrument. And other teachers had used, imagery and so forth, and I use that still, but trying to base it on something that is really honest, like just so we are human animals, and chimpanzees have the right idea about making sound.
Good.
It travels, and they don't seem to get sore throats. They don't blow more air up there than necessary. So things like that. But Cornelius was really extremely important in my understanding of voice and the science of it. And life can be cruel at times, because towards the end of my time at the Met, I was having some difficulties because I was singing. I had 14 operas I was responsible for in my last season and everything. So I was just overworked and things weren't working that well. And someone, somewhere, from somewhere came a rumor that I had sued Cornelius Reed.
Oh.
And I heard it. I thought, what is this? I invited Cornelius to get together to have lunch. And I said, I don't know where this is coming from. And do you want me to take an article, to have an interview, take an article and put an end to this? He said, no. He said, no. He said, don't do that. And that was really hurtful to me, because it was hurtful to him.
Yes.
Absolutely false. And I've looked for, somebody said, well, I saw it in a newspaper article. I've looked for it, never was able to find anything like that. His widow, about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a reprint of his seminal, his free voice. And she asked me to write a foreword for it, which I leapt at the opportunity to do. And because I never had a problem working the way he worked. And it just, he was somewhat controversial, especially the use of the falsetto. I didn't quite understand that, but I had no problem. My difficulties had to do with overwork and singing this and that. I owe him a great deal. He was an incredible human being, scholar, and a lovely soul. And I'll always remember my lessons with him. He had this big old German shepherd, Toby, who would sit under the piano while we had lessons and point. So my teaching today is, again, as I said, it's bolstered and supported by what I've come to understand of vocal function and of compression, how to ensure that compression is there without. One of the teachers I worked with before I met Cornelius said that I would say one thing about supports: you must always keep your stomach out. Well, I tried doing that, and the only thing it gave me was gas. But I came to realize that when things are working properly, there's a kind of rotational thing that happens, and the back muscles and everything are, oh, but how do I trigger that?
Right.
With my imagination, rather than trying to physically do it. I always go back to the old etude interview with Enrico Caruso back in, I think it was in the 20s. And the interviewer asked Caruso, he said, how is it that you sing those fantastic high notes? And Caruso said, I make a move like I make when I'm sitting on the potty. And in subsequent reprints of that article, that line is taken out. There's an ellipsis there. Why? Because people misunderstood. They said, oh, okay, so I've got to sing. No, that's not what it's about. So finding the natural way of triggering the response that seats the larynx without my swallowing it, opens up the backspace without my singing in it, opens up the nasopharyngeal area without my trying to put something in there like this, and being in touch with the place where my diaphragm is attached to my sternum, where I can feel a response when I go, ooh, oh boy, yeah, that felt good. And there is a response that I can't physically try to make. It's got to happen naturally. That's the way I try to proceed with people, to realize that when you see somebody stealing your car, you're going to make a noise that that person's going to listen to, hear, and you're not going to be aware of the fact that you're singing a high B flat, right? But it's a message that is created because you've got something that you have to express. And that making sound without having something to express is just an empty gesture. It might sound pretty, but it's not going to carry the message. I've often said that, all babies born into this world speak the same language. Whether they're born in China, Japan, or Africa, or Germany, they all speak the same language. And if you put those babies in the same group, they understand each other. One of them starts, and then there it goes. It's only after we learn the language of our people that we can no longer understand each other. Non lo so, non ho visto niente, je ne sais pas, weiß nicht. What? But singing, there's a reason why singing is the universal language, because if you listen to babies, when they are trying to express their feelings, they don't have words. The sounds they make are basically music, what we call musical sounds. And that's what we're doing on stage. And when we can find a way of doing it that triggers the same response that the baby feels when the baby's trying to say, my diaper is full or my stomach is empty, and we're singing, it's the same thing. It's the same connection. And we got to find that so that what we do is natural on stage, and we'll give the proper support to the larynx, connection between mind, solar plexus, where we feel things. I ask students, what is the solar plexus? And most of them don't know. So, well, it's that place where all of your nerve endings come together. It's where you feel things, emotion, where you feel in the center of your body, chakra, but that's what it is. And out of that gathering of nerves comes the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
What is that? Not Las Vegas, but the vagus nerve.
Yes.
Right? And it wraps around your heart and is attached to your larynx. Mind to emotion, to the center of emotion, the nerves, and your heart and your throat. So if that pathway can always be active when we are singing, then the sounds that we make are going to touch the minds and the souls and the solar plexus of the listeners. And you may have the greatest voice, but if you are functioning on that axis, your voice and your performance will be the one that people will remember. So trying to make them aware of this and how the connection is played out in the body, so you feel grounded whenever you're going to the top of your voice rather than trying to reach out of yourself to do something. You're in the same place.
Mm-hmm.
This then is free to do what it needs to do, to tilt, to stretch, to do all that good stuff, without you trying to manipulate your thyroid, retinoid, you can't mess with that if it's going to work properly. You got to keep your hands off of it, but you have to know that that's what's going on. Well, I don't know if that begins to address your question or not.
It does beautifully, actually. It's a yes, you actually walked us through some really lovely thoughts, and that at the core it has to be inspired by communication and emotion, and that's what all the work we do is about. And yes, well, what a wonderful way to wrap up our time together. I just cannot thank you enough for your wisdom about how to inspire and motivate our students, about how to be better humans. I really appreciate the conversation about diversity, and your willingness to continue to stay in the conversation was really poignant for me. And now bringing it to a conclusion with how to inspire our students to sing from their heart. That's a wonderful, wonderful way to wrap things up tonight. So thank you everyone for joining us. Professor, it has just been an honor to share this time with you. You are a remarkable human being that comes through the platform, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It was an honor to be able to share and to be a part of music. A conveyor of music is a blessing that I cherish, and to be a part of the community of those of us, all of you who bring music into the lives of those who desperately at this point need it. I would hope that members of Congress would all put on their masks and sing together. It would. When 9/11 hit and I saw members of Congress standing on the Capitol steps, many of whom had voted against the NEA, I wanted to go up to them and ask them, why are you singing right now?
Right.
Maybe singing out of tune, but you're singing. What does that mean for your soul? You can understand that. Why is it that you find it difficult to support the arts, to support music, to support music education in the schools? Music was at one point considered a prerequisite for the study of philosophy. How many people know that? What did the ancients understand about the power of music? That we don't. It's not a frill. It is life force.
Yeah. Necessity.
Life force. But thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good night.
Good night.